Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me? Hello. I'd just like to welcome you all to our session today on financial advice in the age of AI. My name's Michelle Bowes and I'm a wealth reporter at the Australian Financial Review, and I will be your MC and panel moderator today. I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all First Nations people here with us today. And just before we begin, finally, please ensure your mobile phones are switched to silent. Now, in today's discussion, we will explore how technology is creating new opportunities to build affordable and, importantly, scalable financial advice solutions. We're going to look at some of the opportunities, the risks, and the challenges of technology-enabled financial advice and how to manage those, all of which should help to inform your digital advice and member engagement strategies. Now, I'll introduce our panellists to you. Starting at the far end, we have Mills Oakley partner and legal and regulatory expert Zein Hassan. Next, we have the CEO and founder of digital advice platform Otivo, Paul Feeney. Financial technology and implementation expert and co-founder of Finura, Peter Warne. And finally, super and data expert Ian Fryer, the general manager of Chant West. Please join me in welcoming them. Now, let's dive in and talk about the financial advice landscape as we find it right now, the role of technology in delivering advice services, what's possible right now, and the time frame for digital advice and AI. Peter, I might start with you.
So I think we are well behind where we should be from an industry perspective. So I'm not going to bore everyone to tears with the advice gap. We know the issues. But what we've got in Australia at the moment, I think, is a very strong product development capability. We are very good at building superannuation products. We're very good at distributing them. What we're not terribly good is putting advice around those products. So I think one of the challenges that we're continuing to see is that institutions and organisations who really understand super are good at that. But the minute it becomes a retirement advice conversation, we are far less progressed. So I'm a little bit in a negative in a sense. I think we've got a long way to go. And I think some of the announcements even this morning from the government talking about trying to almost nationalise retirement shows us where we're at. And it shows that if we don't innovate and develop things ourselves, we will be regulated.
I agree. Paul, what about you? Where do you think things stand right now?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Peter saying there. And I think it comes down to a matter of perspective. Too often, people are looking at the product, looking at the wallet share, looking at assets under management. They're forgetting the one key thing. Well, what's right by the individual? Yeah? And if we turn our perspective around and say, what do we need to do to make sure those individuals can be better off, have a better retirement, have a better life, then you approach it in an entirely different way. And you start helping them. And you start ignoring the stuff that came out from the government this morning has got nothing to do with what's best for the individual. And I think it's just a thought bubble that a politician puts out there because it's election time, so we can ignore it. But it's, and that's probably what, from Otivo's perspective, that's what makes us fundamentally different, because our DNA is, I don't care about the rest of the stuff. I just care about what's right for that individual who's sitting right there right now. And when you do that, you come up with a different solution and a different approach, which, if we get that way, all the products and everything else will take care of itself, because individuals will use them, they'll engage, because it's fit for purpose for them.
Great. Ian, where do you see things as they stand now?
Yeah, the government announcement this morning was interesting, and in some ways, I don't blame them going down that path because the industry hasn't stepped up. The Retirement Income Covenant is supposed to mandate that funds have products and services, advice and guidance. They're going to help people get from where they're at the moment in some, probably My Super product, to a retirement strategy that's going to work for them in the long run. The issue is that in Superland, in accumulation, it's pretty easy. If you're in a default, you're okay, generally. But for pension, what's ideal for the member is just so broad and has so many different variables that it depends on. So superannuation funds are good at doing the easy stuff. They're not good at doing the hard stuff. They've had a few years to do it, they haven't done it. In terms of what's delivered at the moment, there's lots of calculators. Every fund says, oh, we need a calculator. Put the calculator on. Often there's not many links to it. Some of those calculators are a bit more helpful. They have a little report at the end about saying, okay, you've told us this, here's some things you can do, but it's still not advice. The examples of digital advice are quite small. So I think it's probably 5 or 6, I think, genuine digital advice. Some of them are better than others. But there's hardly any. The vast majority at the moment are looking at things like insurance, looking at contributions, looking at investment options, and they're good. The next stage really needs to be to move into the retirement space. Probably most Aussies, when they retire, need advice. At the moment, there'll be less than 10% get advice. There's no way we can just have an army of advisors go and talk to people or even on the phone. Digital advice is probably the main way to fill that gap. So really important thing for us to talk about. If we're going to be involved in having good retirement and financial outcomes for people in retirement, digital advice is part of the solution, probably a big part of the solution.
And Zein, finally, from a legal perspective, what's possible at the moment and how far do we trail behind what's possible, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I know Peter was a bit sort of dirty on the industry in terms of not moving fast enough.
So dirty, frustrated.
Frustrated.
I'm the same, yeah.
And I think, you know, absolutely, I agree with you. But from a legal perspective, the good news is that you can actually do it. So both in terms of digital advice, you know, simple calculators all the way through to holistic advice, you can do it under the current legal framework, and that is good news, right? And then if we're moving into AI, you know, we're going to sort of hear about that a little bit later. You can actually make AI safe in the digital advice space, and we've been sort of working through that with Paul and others. So it is doable.
Good news. Okay, that sounds like a challenge. Now, there's no doubt that it's a period of flux and change. I think in Australia we've got a lot of people retiring or on the verge of retirement. We've got regulators that are actively involved in industry, and we've got a government change potentially on the horizon. So there's an awful lot going on. There's no doubt the government wants super funds to do more and better for their members. Against that backdrop, I'd like to ask you what challenges you think super funds are facing right now when it comes to implementing digital advice. Peter, I might go to you again.
I think the challenge for funds, to be fair to them, is for the last decade they've actually been told get big or merge. So survival has been we need to eat or we're going to be eaten has probably, I think, dominated the thinking of a lot of funds. And that creates a whole lot of behaviours and unintended consequences, I think, when that was, you know, really driven into them. So that's probably one thing. But I think, you know, the funds that we've worked with over the years, and one of the funds we do work with, UniSuper, announced a sizable investment in digital advice today, is they've got to get clear in their head what the long-term business case is for what they're going to do. So we often hear from funds that we want to do digital advice, and yet they can't connect what that investment looks like and what the outcomes need to be. I find it curious because they talk about members' best interests and you know, the BFIB, I think it's called, and yet I would argue that the small investments in advice early in the piece can have massive benefits for members over the long term. So I just feel we haven't, obviously, we clearly have a gap or a knowledge gap potentially at the trustee level about what best interest really is for members over very long periods of time, not short term, and that I feel is the gap at the moment.
Can I just continue with you for a second? Do you think it's because advice roles or executive level advice positions aren't elevated up to kind of senior executive ranks yet?
Yeah, 100%. So I can't think of any not-for-profit super fund in Australia that has a trustee, first I'll start at that level, that has a trustee or a director with deep advice experience. I could be wrong, but that's, Ian might correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I can't think of it. I'm not sure there's any chief advice officer either.
Certainly not,
They
no.
generally come under
Yeah.
the services somewhere, so it's secondary to everything else.
Yeah, so I mean, every fund we talk to, we simply say if you do not have an advice person around the table, an executive's job is competing for resources. So quite simply, if the advice head is not around the exec table, how are they going to get resources for things like digital advice?
Paul, I know you've got a view about perhaps the misconception about whether advice is core to the business model of super funds. What do you think there?
I think if we take a little step back, look at the Retirement Income Covenant, and the government is essentially asking, or if not mandating, super funds, you need to know your members better so you can be proactive. The super funds are going, well, I don't know enough about them, so how do I get that information? And the members are going, well, why would I tell you anything about me if you're not going to help me with answering the one question I want answered? What do I need to do next so I can be better off? But if all of a sudden you put advice in the centre of that little triangle, and the super fund says to the member saying, give me 5 bits of information and I can help you with X, 5 more and I'll help you with Y. All of a sudden now the super fund has got enough information so they can start to become proactive with their members, and the member's happy because they've been given an answer of what I need to do next, and all of a sudden the government's off your back because you're proactively helping them all. And the magical thing, all Australians are better off. Yeah, that advice part, and I agree with Peter as well, retirement starts when you open your super fund account. It's getting that right advice, even if it's just the investment option, but that's where it starts. And all the other risks that people talk about, sequencing and longevity and that sort of stuff, disappears because you've got enough money in there because you've made the right decisions along the way.
Interesting. Now, Zein, I know that from a legal perspective, I'm sure you've got some comments on the duty of trustees to act in the best financial interests of their members and where advice plays into that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michelle. I mean, Peter mentioned the best financial interest duty and sort of, how do trustees build their business case for investment in digital? And to me, to be honest, it's a bit of a no-brainer, because if you think in terms of, helping your members make better decisions in relation to their super, maximising, optimising their super, and better planning for retirement, it's pretty straightforward, right? So I know that there's a big sort of focus on expenses by trustees, both in terms of OPEX and CAPEX. But if you look across your membership and you provide all your membership with access to affordable, quality advice, I think it should be pretty easy to get over that hurdle.
Let's talk now about the current approach that super funds are taking. We've already talked about calculators a little bit, and the need for evolution. Paul, I might start with you.
I think we've got to start straight away. There's a difference between calculators and advice. And too often people launch a calculator and they call it advice. It's nothing near it. And I suppose that the real easy way is Oxford Dictionary says the definition of advice is having an opinion or a suggestion on what someone should do next. Yeah? A calculator, you pull the information in and you have to guess and play around with, should I put more money into super, should I do this or do that? What advice does is it tells you exactly how much you should put in each month, how much insurance you need given your situation. So we've got to have that separation to begin with, otherwise you can't even have the conversation about it. I mean, and that's where it's the advice stuff, general advice and calculators, or just pure education that's generic, is wasting members' time. Yeah, because you expect them to take that away and plant that over their current situation and their family and still make a well-informed decision. They're not interested. They just want to know what to do next. The solution's there, and my frustration probably coming through my tone a little bit, is that it exists. It's waiting for organisations to step up. And I think in corporate Australia in general, nobody wants to go first. Nobody wants to go first. But
there's no reward. There's no for executives in super funds. There is no reward for taking big risks, nor for trustees.
So is that a mix-up then of the incentives inside those organisations to those executives?
Show me the incentive and I'll show you the behaviour.
Exactly.
That's right.
Spot on.
Yeah, like superannuation fund executives are measured on things you can measure. So, for example, on performance and retention and all that sort of stuff. But super funds don't exist for the purpose of retention. They exist for the purpose of getting good member outcomes, but it's really hard to measure that. So there's not a clear measure, so it's not in the KPIs, so it's not the focus. But that should absolutely be the focus. It's the whole point of the whole system. So sadly, I think a lot of it is to do with incentives.
And probably money to an extent. Peter, I'm sure people might be, well, I'm not sure who's in the room, but this might attract some ire for you from some people, but where do you think the money for investment in digital advice could come from?
Sounds like a layup, that question. Sponsorships of footy teams.
I've set you up.
I like the Melbourne Storm and I like all these footy teams. It's all good and I understand.
We're gonna edit
and I'm a
that
big
out.
advocate for grassroots sports sponsorship, by the way. My kids play Auskick and I think it's great that businesses do that. But one would question whether a not-for-profit super fund should be directing large amounts of sponsorship dollars to a individual sporting team. Is that truly in the best interests of all members? The current reality is the top 10 funds in Australia, for every dollar that gets spent on advice, member services, $1.60 gets spent on advertising and sponsorships. You tell me whether that's out of whack.
I think once again, though, the incentives are about retention and growth. And those sort of things, sponsorships, feed into retention and growth.
And you can measure sponsorships. There's all sorts of consultants out there that have these weird and wonderful attention tracking data things that say, oh, we great bang for buck off that.
But the funny thing is retention and growth comes from when you actually help someone be better off. On our platform, 75% of people who use Otivo, their advice is to put more money into super. If that doesn't help growth, I don't know what does.
They should be paying you for. Sorry. Now, sorry, Zein, can't leave you out of this one. Why do you think people are holding back at the moment in Superland? Do you think they're waiting for something that may not be coming in a hurry?
I think it's difficult to answer that question. I might just sort of turn it a little bit around the retention sort of issue, because there is a focus on retention and there is data on that. But if you think in terms of metrics, the regulators accept qualitative metrics as well as quantitative. So, qualitative is judgment calls, intuition. And if you think in terms of retention from a qualitative perspective, all other things being equal, if you've got good net investment performance and you offer quality, affordable advice to your membership, and you arm them and empower them to make better decisions that optimise and maximise their super, why would they want to leave your fund?
I completely agree with you. I think a question I have is, do you think there's a bit of sitting on hands waiting for the tranche 2 of delivering better financial advice coming, or people that are waiting for that? And with the election looming, well, is that just going to be like waiting for something that may never eventuate?
Well, it's easier to answer that question. Look, I think trustees are sort of waiting for those reforms, but I don't think they have the sort of liberty to do so, because I think both the government and the regulators are saying you need to act now. So with an election coming and with the likelihood of minority governments, it's unlikely that we're going to see those reforms anytime soon. And as I said, you can actually make digital advice and AI-powered advice safe and reliable under the current regime. I think what trustees have been sort of pushing for is the personalised nudges, which at the moment under the current law are difficult to sort of nudge people to take action, because to do that involves personal financial product advice. And you can't do that through a call centre, you can't do it through a marketing campaign. You can only do it through personal advice tools, and you need a personal advice authorisation. So under the current law, you can't do personalised nudges. I think trustees are waiting for those. They want to be able to sort of nudge people to take action without it being regulated personal advice. But the thing is, that may not come because of the election. So I think we need to get on with it.
Can I ask a question there? So why are they scared of giving personal advice? Because it's the only thing that's valuable to the member. That is the only thing that's valuable.
I can't answer that question.
Or you won't? Or
And in terms of like waiting, we can't wait. I think there's a couple of 100,000 people retiring each year. So we can say, okay, let's wait for a few years until it gets sorted out. We can't do that. There'll be a couple of 100,000 people who go into retirement, won't get advice at the point of retirement, won't get advice ever probably, and will have suboptimal outcomes. So something needs to be done now. And I agree, the funds can do more, should be doing more. I think a lot of the reasons are lots of regulation these days, lots of regulatory change. We have our super fund awards coming up in a few months, and we used to have maybe 7 or 8 sort of finalists for innovation award, but now it's getting really hard to find one. And it's just because there's so much going on. But there's got to be some strategic decisions, whether it means you've got to charge an extra 10 cents per member per week or something, so you can actually do this stuff. I think if you spoke to a member and said, okay, would you prefer to pay $5 a week, $5 a year more, or would you prefer to do that and get some advice to help you at the point of retirement and all through, or just to have the what you're doing at the moment? I think most people would say, well, I need help. I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. I'll pay the $5. I want to get that stuff. I'm
so glad you mentioned that, because I think chronic underinvestment in technology is a real problem for super funds. And to be fair to the funds, that's competitions caused that, where it was all about getting to a certain level and fee comparisons and all the rest of it. I think the challenge is that the fees have gone down now so low that the money is just not there. And if anyone wants proof of that, look at the performance of Link as a business, who are the largest super fund administrator in Australia. Iris just sold off their super admin business. It is a shitty business to be in, being a super fund technology provider. And with tech vendors, it's all about price. So I think we need some recalibration, because the size of super, it's getting to that national infrastructure level where, like, if CBA's ATMs go down for a day, the PM comments. If a super fund misses pension payments for a week, does anyone talk about it? Do we know?
It did come up a couple of months ago, actually.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it did. But I think your point still holds. I think we need to see a whole lot more. And indeed, super funds. So, a few years ago, we spoke to a trustee board, and they asked us, what is the one thing that we should do? And you know what we said? Increase your fees. Increase the fees so you can provide decent service. And that hasn't happened, and it needs to.
Yeah. But Ian, there's sort of continuing pressure and focus on expenses, and then you've got the APRA performance test. So you've got the regulators and the government and the legislative test pushing expenses down, and yet at the same time the regulators are saying you need to lift your game on member services, and it just doesn't compute. So I agree, there needs to be more.
But I think $5 a year won't break the bank. $5 a year for a fund like Aussie Super is going to be north of $10 million. There's a lot you can do in the advice space for that.
Paul, what do you think about the value, I suppose, of advice and charging for it? What's your take?
As in opposed to collective fees or an individual member paying for it, or?
Sure.
I mean, we're all saying, well, let's hunt for the money in there. The other elephant in the room is you can ask the member to pay for it out of their individual account. Yeah. There's an option for that, yeah? And it's less than a cup of coffee a week to be able to do it, yeah? It's less than that. And so at the moment, you've got individuals having to choose between buying a new car or getting advice, yeah? Or not a new car, a used car. But, a new car for the kid or whatever, but a car or advice. And they shouldn't have that choice. You don't need to have that choice, yeah? But the value advice over that longer term can turn into hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the data that we've got, looking at all, it's almost $350,000 you can be better off over the course of your life by just getting the right advice. Yeah. So you equate that back to $5 a year, it's a no-brainer. Yeah. But it comes down to, when you said earlier, the trustees and stuff wondering what their strategy is and how they should do it. It's one simple thing. It's to give people a better retirement. That's it. That is it.
Now, obviously, financial advice is a licensed product. Zein, are there regulatory challenges in providing digital advice to members?
Overall, you've got to comply with the legislation, and there's lots of, sections and regulations and sort of regulatory expectations. But there's two sort of critical aspects to advice which I think are sort of friction points. One is the best interest duty, and if you're sort of paying for advice out of super, can you consider the member's assets and income outside of super? And that's a threshold issue, because how can you give appropriate advice if you don't? And my view is you can consider assets and income outside of super, as long as the resulting advice is about the member's interest in the fund. So that's one sort of friction point. The other friction point is the scope of the intra-fund advice requirements, again. So with that test, again, what are the inputs into that and what are the outputs? And without getting technical, I think they're the two things that I think trustees are struggling with. But we've sort of, we've reviewed digital advice modules that are currently in market, and you can navigate through it. But I think the mindset is applying those tests from the perspective of looking at the advice process of a human advisor, whereas digital advice is different.
Just on that, we have noticed the funds who have more mature advice businesses, so have been in comprehensive advice and sort of understand those frameworks, are a lot more comfortable applying them into digital. It's when you don't have much experience in advice, that's where funds are more gun shy, we find.
Interesting. We've talked a lot about super funds and perhaps what they should do and perhaps what we think members want, but what about engaging members? We're talking about a bunch of people that are, generally speaking, pretty disengaged with their super. How can super funds get members to, if you build it, will they come?
Not if you don't tell them about it. You've got to tell them about it, yeah? And you've got to take away all the friction points that allow them to get in there and utilise it and have a play. Let them at it. Let them have a play, yeah? Because the more friction points you put in there, the more hoops they've got to jump through, the less likely they are going to use it. Yeah? And then all of a sudden, then you can go out to the rest of the members and say, well, people like you have used this tool, and guess what? They're better off by X. They're more confident. They're more comfortable. So would you like to use it? And so then all of a sudden you can go and do nudges. And like a platform like ours, every super fund should know the age of someone, their investment options that they're in right now, and their balance. You can run that data through Otivo and you can give a unique nudge to every single member and either say, great news, you're in the right investment, stay put. Or if you make a change, you can be better off by X. Would you like to find out what it is? And sure, I think a third of Australians just don't give a shit. Yeah? They're not going to do anything. But the other 60-odd%, you send that to them, you're going to get a lot of them. Oh, that's interesting. Let me click on that and explore. You just got to tell them about it.
As a proud Australian, this kills me, but I think if we look across the ditch to New Zealand, the Kiwi Saver is a good example of where if you don't have mandatory contributions but you have a forced matching structure like they do in New Zealand, those Kiwi Saver providers, they do an amazing job with engagement because they have to survive. They really pitch that. They're all over social media. So I can't think of all of them, but Milford, look at them, for example. They're one of the biggest providers in New Zealand of Kiwi Saver. Follow their social channels. It's incredible. And it's all young people talking about Kiwi Saver, and they nail it.
What about digital? That scary word. Will people warm to digital advice?
Gee, I hope so. If you look at the analogy of an internet banking or ATM machines, like, show of hands, who loves going into the bank now and seeing a teller? Exactly. No one wants to do that. But 20 years ago, you can't get rid of tellers. No one's going to trust a machine to give their money to them and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we're very, very at the start of that sort of period at the moment. And the only way to make advice ubiquitous, when it's a living plan and everyone's got it, you're going to get there. It has to be digital in that way. But every single person, our internet banking, it's just second nature. We're going to get there. Yeah, and unfortunately, some people have got to trailblaze it and get it there and make it right. But it's going to happen. There's, without a shadow of a doubt. I can't tell you what time it is, but I'll look back and say that was the day when it started at some stage.
Yeah, good point. Now, we've talked a little bit about retention of members and that being such a strong KPI for super funds. And a little bit, at least, Paul, I know you've shared your thoughts on how digital advice could help with this. Ian, what do you think about the role of digital advice in helping funds retain members, that holy grail?
I think it's right that when someone gets help through either a intra-fund advice or even comprehensive advice or digital advice, they go away thinking, how good is my fund? And that has an impact on retention. The issue is the number of members who are doing that is actually quite small. And I'm assuming funds would be measuring that, measuring NPS with the fund, etc. after those sorts of activities. But I think so far the number of people who've been impacted has actually been quite small. So funds haven't been able to see it translate into those other metrics. But if you had half of the members getting advice in the fund, you would see it translate. So why not push the advice out, push these services out, so you can see that translate into strong retention? And not just strong retention for those who are in the fund, but so many people say, okay, yeah, I've got my super fund, I don't know what it is. If you really help someone, they're going to chat to their mates and they're going to get in as well. So I think providing that service is going to lead to growth, is going to lead to retention. We just haven't had it at scale yet to be able to prove it.
Now, I think we might take a look at what some specific funds have already done or are doing in this space. Paul, you were going to talk us through what Otivo is doing with Colonial First State.
Yeah, we've got a few people in the room who have had that lived experience. And so we've been working with CFS for quite a while now, and members can call up their guidance team. I think it all started because members were calling up and saying, oh, I'm worried about what's going on in the world, am I in the right investment option? They used to say, well, you need to go and speak to an advisor. I don't have an advisor. Well, you need to go and speak to one. Well, it's bad experience. So now it's, well, hey, our digital advice partner Otivo can help you with that. Would you like to set up an account and answer some questions? And so they go through that sort of process now. And eventually over time, the other super funds are working with and CFS, they'll make it available to more members and getting it out to more and more people. But the great thing is that the results that we've talked about, it's like 90-odd% of people saying, wow, this is easy to use. 80-odd% of people say, wow, that advice is really valuable. And we've mentioned that dirty word retention a few times, and it's like 2/3 of people have come back and said, wow, I'm less likely to leave because this is available. So the proof is there, it's now just getting in front of more people. And we're working with the fund to do that.
Yeah. And Peter, I think you mentioned earlier Uni Super have just announced today something they're doing in this space. You're going to talk us through that?
Yeah, so they've announced a really sizable investment in digital advice, which I think has been going for a long time to sort of get to this point. I'm really pleased by this in the sense that it should be a very strong signal to their peers that they're serious about it. I would say a business like UniSuper that's had a very established, mature advice business for a long time, they spend a lot of money on comprehensive advice. They probably have a better intuition for what the long-term benefits will be, and probably a different business model idea in this. I don't think it's about retention for UniSuper. I think they know that their advice brand is so strong, they just can't keep up with the demand. So good on them, and I hope others follow.
We've talked a lot about digital advice, but something we haven't talked about yet is AI and the role of AI. You know, we're all using it these days in our lives. Paul, I know Otivo is doing some exciting things in this space. What can AI look like in financial advice today?
I think some of the criticisms we get when people look at digital advice platform, it's you're lacking that human interaction, that ability to ask questions and to help and all that sort of stuff and get clarity, which builds confidence for people to actually go forward and implement stuff. That's the role that AI can play, and that's the role that we're utilising AI at Otivo. Essentially, you can get the advice, the Otivo engine generates it, but then you want the ability for someone to ask a question. And so imagine ChatGPT. We've all used it. We know what it's all about. Imagine ChatGPT that's licensed to give personal financial advice. So at the end of this, when we all stop talking, Nathan's sitting over there. You can go up to him on the laptop and you can have a play with Ask Otivo. So it's a sort of a soft launch today for people to go and build it. And Ruben's over there and some of the developers, you can ask them questions. But what it does is enable someone to say, why are you recommending that investment option for me? What are the alternatives? And so you can have a conversation with it. Ruben's is going to hate me saying this, but eventually we're going to be able to have the ability to talk to it and it can talk back to you. But it's giving the option for someone to have that voice one or have that text one or go through the modals that we've already built. So it's giving people the choice to use the interface they have. And then all of a sudden, when you get the ability to ask those questions, your financial literacy increases, your financial education increases, not because you've been asked to read something, but because it's delivered in your personal context. And so as a result, you're more likely to implement that and go forward. And in the end, one thing's going to happen. You're going to be better off. That's what AI can do for us at the moment. And I could sit up here and try and sound really smart and tell you how it all works. If you want to get that technical, I'll give the microphone to Rubens and he can tell you exactly how it works.
So just to clarify, Paul, sorry. So is the advice, the smarts, is that coming from AI or is just the presentation coming from AI?
So at the moment, the Otivo engine builds out the actual recommendations. That's been vetted by Zein and his team in the past. The AI, and this I'm going to try and get really technical here, and Rubens is going to laugh at me. The AI, through our prompt engineering, sort of builds the guardrails around what it's doing. And then it can actually have a function call back to the actual advice engine that Otivo's built and utilize that. So when it says, tell me about salary sacrifice. Oh, given your situation, you should salary sacrifice $750. It's going to do this, it'll improve your retirement by X. And this is how it works. So it gives you that greater context as it goes through. And then a smart lawyer who might be sitting to my right one day said to us, well, how do you know that's right? And so then what our team has done has built an automated AI compliance application where it can check every single conversation that Otivo has with a client, whether it's the SOA, whether it's inputting the data, whether it's the AI chat, and it actually runs through, and we've trained this one to say, look, you're a 20-year veteran financial planner, you've got all this knowledge, check every single interaction if it meets the Corps Act, the ethics stuff, the certain RG guides, and tell us which parts of those conversations may not be compliant, where it falls apart on one of those regs, what you need to change to better that. And the reason I bring that up is that when you're in a compliance team, all you're trying to do is find needles in a haystack. Yeah? And it's really hard to find those ones. When you find them, they're not good. What this application does is goes, here's the needles. Just correct them. And then you know everything else is correct. I mean, so when you marry those two things together, and I won't steal Rubens' thunder, you can talk to you about the future plans for that one. But when you marry those things together, you've got the confidence that you're delivering the right advice. The individual's learning more, so their confidence level is higher, and they're more likely to implement the advice that was given to them.
Zein, are you confident about AI in the delivery of digital advice? What's your take?
Well, it's very interesting. To Ian's point, in terms of what part of the machine generates the advice. So that's the Otivo algorithmic engine. So it's not the AI. What the AI does is just use words to explain that advice in a different way. But literally, from a legal perspective, it's information, not advice. But the magic of AI is sort of, as Paul sort of mentioned, is, surprisingly, unexpectedly, it actually can build more trust because it engages with you in language that you're more likely to understand, which is fantastic. And the other thing that's amazing about it is the speed at which it does it. So Ian Knox, where are you, Ian? Sort of told us the story before we started where he had a technical issue with his computer and he got online and he was talking to AI, Gemini, and going through, and it was all done through voice, and he couldn't tell whether it was a person or the AI. And so I think that's the magic and the power and the potential of AI. In terms of legal compliance, I think if you can set up the prompt engineering, which are the guardrails, so that the AI is literally bound by the actual complying advice and is just representing it in easier to understand words, then from a legal perspective, it's easier to manage that risk. And the way in which you sort of manage the risk is by saying the advice is actually in the statement of advice. And the AI is there to better explain it. But if there's an inconsistency, only rely on the advice in the SOA. Nice and easy. So that's an example of where with appropriate sort of the appropriate lens through which you see the AI and the output, you can actually manage that risk really effectively.
I think here's a newsflash for everyone. It's like all advice is generated digitally. All of it is. It's how it's delivered that's different. Most of the time it's delivered face to face with an expensive advisor who's got to charge you 5 to 10 grand. Yeah? Or you can have a digital platform that instantly gives you that advice and it has an AI chat that has that conversation like you would with an advisor who's delivering it. Yeah? It's not a huge leap. It's just a different perspective on how we look at it. And then all of a sudden you can make it available to every single Australian. And for us, there's what, 10 million households? We're going to be generous, say 1 million get advice. There's a moral obligation for the other for us to give advice to the other 9 million.
I'm sold. So if
I was gonna say
AI
it's a
can
sales
deliver
pitch.
advice, why can't I just go to ChatGPT and ask it for my financial advice?
Well, I did that. ChatGPT does give financial advice. So if you want to know sort of, should you put your money into super or managed funds, it'll tell you. If you want to compare super funds,
What does it say?
it says super. If you want to compare super funds and say, look, I want sort of, good performance, low fees, and I want to invest, in a balanced option, which fund should I invest in? It'll give you 3 funds. It'll recommend 3 funds. I won't tell you which ones they are. And if you say, how much should I put in? It'll say, well, it depends on your personal circumstances. So, and then you can sort of put in 3 or 4, whatever you like, really. It will tell you whether you should put money into super. And you can ask it, well, if I put that amount in for 20 years, what would I have at the end? And what if I change the interest rate? It will do all this, right? The question is, what information is it using? Is it appropriate advice? Are the calculations right?
Yeah, you have to then tell it, oh, don't forget to take the 15% tax out of the contribution to the super, and not many people outside this room know that, to say that to the thing. So it can give misleading advice, and that's the critical part, where if you've got a licensed engine that's doing it, then you know that it's actually compliant, and that's the difference.
Can I just say, don't rely on the advice from ChatGPT.
Yeah, okay, no.
I don't know if that's I think we're missing the point a little bit, in the sense that we now have an emerging competitor as professionals. Lawyers, you have a competitor in ChatGPT. I've gotten some great legal advice.
Bring it on.
Out of ChatGPT. Doctors, we all do, right? So I think every professional service has to contend with this. So I think the lesson from ChatGPT for me is that the 2 most successful websites in history have been google.com and now ChatGPT. And the reason they were successful is they had a very simple interface. Very simple. I go into every average super fund, I get a calculator, all these boxes, like, shit, who's got the time to go through this? All this stuff flashing at me. So the game is going to be won by the people that can nail, firstly, the data, secondly, the interface with the customer, and the third bit's the trust. I would argue that there are people who are going to trust ChatGPT because it helped them with Ian's computer problem more than a super fund they don't have much engagement with. That's where the challenge is going to be for us.
Yeah, I've got to say that when I saw the advice it produced, I thought it was bloody brilliant until I spoke to Rubens and he said, the maths is all wrong because it only deals with words, not maths. And I thought, dear me. But that's the point. Like, the thing is, it's so convincing, but I agree with Peter. The interface is amazing. So we need to get to the point where through language, voice and video, it's like talking to a person. And that functionality is available. But we need the prompt engineering to evolve, and we need to sort of link it to the advice generation engines so you can then produce a human-like interaction in the same way that Ian had with Gemini.
So, Paul, you've talked a little bit about how Otivo has tackled making its AI compliant and safe, unlike the ChatGPT situation, which is sort of terrifying, actually. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of what needs to go on in the back end to produce something that is going to be compliant and safe?
To make sure it works and all that sort of stuff, and what was done to get there? Yep,
and make sure it's not breaking any laws too.
Yep. I could try and make it up, but I'm thinking if I could get Rubens to give us a bit of an idea of what's involved in actually building this out. From a legal perspective, the advice is generated by the Otivo engine. That's been checked and so forth, so that's great. But it's how you actually build this so it can function, and the work behind that. I'll pass over to Rubens because I'm just going to make it up.
That's all right. So the idea of putting AI into an advice platform, obviously the first thing, like everyone's been saying, is the compliance risk, right? How do you make sure that this is actually going to stay on track? So the approach that we took was essentially to enable our advice to generate that information, and then we started to ask it questions, and then realised that really doesn't scale, right? Because I can only ask it, say, 10 questions and get the answers and then check them manually. So what we did instead is we generated a system to talk to the AI. So we ended up getting AI to talk to the AI and generate a whole bunch of potential answers. So we picked some created users that we have, like we just pretend that they're real, but the data is normalized. We then ask the AI to have a conversation with that user. 10, 30 questions are asked per session. We then pass all that information and we've got a whole bunch of data, which is great, but it doesn't give us whether or not it's still compliant. So once we've got all that data, we pass all of that through the auditor. And then we identify all the conversations that were slightly off skew. None of them were completely wrong. Sometimes they forgot to give a disclaimer, and sometimes they just kind of went a little bit off-piste. But over time, we identified the repeating problems. Once the repeating problems were identified, we fixed them, and then we ran the test again. And we iterated over that for a long time. So what we've got now is something that at the end of every day, every conversation that he's had with the AI, which is currently in beta, it's not available to everyone, but if you want access, please let me know. I'd love to get more people trying it. We will get all that information, we'll audit all those conversations, and we'll continuously iterate over it to improve it until such time as we're confident that, hey, 99.9% it gets it right, which is much, much better than the average example, right? So that's how it works. If anyone's got any questions, I'm going to be here. Come grab me, have a chat. I'll talk about this for hours.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Rubens is the CTO at Otivo.
And what about beyond AI, or perhaps beyond chat? Maybe is a better, because I have seen your tool and it is a chat function at the moment. Where can this go? Perhaps comments from you, Paul, about what you know, and perhaps from others.
I mean, stuff that we're going to do now is that you can produce a summary of, give me the summary of all the advice that I need. And then Rubens is working on a function where it's like, oh, and by the way, here's a summary of all the news articles in the last 30 days that's relevant to your personal financial situation. Would you like to have a read of them? And then it's adding that voice as a functionality. And then it's limited to our imagination. You know, what I dream of one day is like, it wouldn't be great if you could then just produce a little 3-minute video that just illustrates your entire financial life and the journey you should go on and what it's going to look like automatically from it all. You know, the technology's got to catch up to our dreaming. But the most important part is to have, I suppose, the motivation, confidence and gumption to have a go and put it out there for people to use. Otherwise, we've all got ideas, but you've got to put it in place and have a go. And so that's what I like most about the organisation we've created, is that everyone's challenging us and saying, no, we can make this better. Because we're just driven to one thing: how do you make the individual's life better off? If you give them better interface, and what you were saying before about that nice clean interface, it's like you're looking into what we're trying to produce in the near future. It's basically, instead of having to fill out a TiVo first, you just open up the chat window and it says, what can I help you with today? And then it'll say, great, I can help you with that. I just need some information. Here's the 6 questions. Answered. Here's the advice. Would you like to see a picture or a graph or whatever it is? Oh, here it is. Do you know what I mean? So, and then you can either do text or voice or whatever it may be. But it's making it ubiquitous, making it easy to use and make it humanistic. Yeah? So you've got that relationship where all of a sudden it's like, I want to be at a barbecue one day and overhearing someone behind me talking about finance, and someone goes, you should ask Otivo that. Then we've done a good job. That'd be awesome.
I think with that interface as well, there's no reason why that can't be on the homepage of a super fund. Yeah. At the moment, there's all these menu items everywhere, and it's like a maze trying to find through. How good would it be if your super fund just had one thing on the front page, ask a question, what do you need?
Yep. Yeah, if you're old enough, you'll remember Yahoo, and then Google came along. It's like the menus are gone. It's like, what do I do? There's this blinking box.
You have an I feel lucky button. That's what Google had when they first think I feel lucky.
We should do that. That's a good idea. Yeah. We can trademark that to you, Pete. Yeah.
Very good.
What would Pete do?
I think so currently there's been some comments made that ChatGPT is really good with the chat stuff, the language stuff. It's really bad with calculations. There'll probably come a time when there'll be whether it's another iteration of ChatGPT or something else, where it'll actually be good with calculations as well. I think that will be a step change. I've got no idea how possible that is, but that would be a big change as well.
Yeah, look, in terms of, what does the future hold? There's probably a few components there, right? So there's the functionality and the capability of the technology, which Peter can talk to. and in conversations we've had, Peter sort of expressed, well, there's lots of calculators, there's voice, there's video, there's language, and a digital process brings all those together and sort of makes them all connect up to effectively engage with you as if you were talking to an advisor. So the functionality is there. The data is not quite there, and Ian can talk to the data. If we can solve for the data so that we have all the information that is necessary for a ChatGPT to give accurate advice, together with the functionality to perform calculations, to have voice, video, language, and then you think in terms of, well, we need the right guardrails so that it accesses the right data in the right order, the right functionality in the right order, and then sort of doesn't go off piste, if you like, and the content that it produces goes through an auditing process, which is what Rubens was talking about. Then you get output that is human-like, is probably better from a risk management perspective, and is going to build trust because of the reliability of the output as well.
All right, we're almost out of time, so I might just go around and get a sort of a 30-second to 1 minute takeaway from each of you to sort of sum up today's conversation. Paul, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure.
30 seconds, Paul.
It's
no selling.
I might be able to give you a minute, Paul. But
No, you're good. I don't know. I'm fundamentally of the belief that when people have the information they need, when they need it to make a well-informed decision, they're going to be better off. So let's make sure every single person who wants it can get that advice.
Ian?
For me, the main game is retirement. 90% of people retiring without any help, they've got no idea what they're doing. If we can provide digital advice at the point of retirement, which is good advice, and we have 90% of people taking it up, how good would that be? That would change the way people live in retirement. So retirement needs digital advice.
Peter?
Mandated money away from sporting sponsorships into advice for super funds. That's number one. Number two hasn't got talked about, but I think these AI solutions like the tool you're building, we've got to find a way to connect these to existing data sources, and there's a really simple one there. If we could connect things like Ask Otivo to MyGov, and I should have the right as a consumer to say, I want to talk to my MyGov and my bank, I have a consumer data right, I think you've got a big piece of the puzzle solved.
Yeah, that's a mic drop moment there. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, you can go now.
And finally, Zein.
Look, this sort of little pearl sort of came with the government's announcement today around, best practice principles around retirement, which includes advice. And I think if the regulators gave us more of a steer around their level of comfort that you can actually provide technology-driven advice under the current regime, that could go a long way to building sort of confidence in the industry that it's doable. From my perspective, it is doable, and you've sort of heard how it can be done, but a steer from the regulators would also help, I think.
Well, everyone, that brings our conversation today to an end. I'd like to thank our panellists for their insights. I hope you've all found it enlightening. If you have any questions for our panellists, they will be here for a while, and there's some food and drinks available, so please feel free to hang around and have a chat with them. And as you know, Otivo's advice AI chatbot will be available for you to have a little play with and a look at. So I thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Thank you.